Wine Talks with Paul K.
This is Robert Mondavi. They call you Junior? Junior. From the Michael Mondavi Winery.
Opus One Winery with Michael Silacci.
Sit back and grab a glass. Listen and subscribe to Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in Southern California, having a great conversation with the great Mr. Kevin O'Leary. We'll get to the introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you hang out for your podcast. And always sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, now sporting the Napa and Bordeaux series of wines. But that's not why we're here today. We have the honor and privilege and the humility to have a great guest, Mr. Kevin O'Leary. You commonly know him as from the Shark Tanks, but he has a tremendous amount of experience in many other industries and businesses. And so welcome to the show, Kevin. Really appreciate you being on.
Great to be here. Thank you very much.
I see you're sitting in a barrel room because we're going to talk about wine. You're wearing your Taste Vin, which is an extraordinary device. Which I think I told you on this little agenda here that I have a small collection of Taste Vin that over the years my father collected.
They're beautiful things. I mean, you think about the rich history of what the Taste Vin is, and all of the poetry around it, and the thief that samples the wine out of the barrel, and all of the artistic aspects of winemaking as opposed to the scientific. But you need both of them today if you want to make money in the wine business.
You know, it's interesting you said that. And so we're going to immediately go off script because I didn't even have this written down, but this is an important thing. I was talking to Peter Mondavi from Krug, and I was telling him about one that the first American president ever to pour an American wine was Eisenhower at a lunch with Queen Elizabeth. But he was telling me that he just got 100 points from a 49 or a 45 or 46, I can't remember, Krug Special Select. And I started thinking, you know, that had to be pre the labs, pre all the phenolic ripeness, pre all the acid testing, or at least much less of it. And here we have this ethereal value in a bottle of wine that just came out of the chutes that this guy created long before the technology and the scientific part of it. And doesn't that bode well for the wines of, for instance, Burgundy and Bordeaux that are classic over the years from non-technology?
It does. However, in modern day winemaking, particularly New World wines, they're not made to last. They're sort of, if you think about the classic American Cabernet Sauvignon, I'd say that 50-60% of them made can't get past 5 years before they start to really roll over. And Chardonnays, so I give them 36 months. The economics of the wine business are nothing less than brutal. And I think, you know, getting right at it, as I'm known as an investor, the old adage, how do you become a millionaire in the wine business? Well, you start as a billionaire. That's true. And so what matters is to start with the realization in North America, 97% of wine is sold for under $14.99 a bottle. 97%.
Wow.
That means there's only 3% of wines that are sold at premium. And so if you can't master the ability to have logistics and be able to ship a minimum of 150,000 cases, which is the break-even number, you'll never make money in the wine business. And I realized that years and years ago. So today I'm proud to say I'm an investor in over 19 different vineyards, so 3,000 acres, either owned or leased, and we ship 2 million cases a year.
Is that part of the O'Leary Estates brand as well?
O'Leary is just one of the brands. It's Vintage Estates. It recently went public on the New York Stock Exchange. I was privileged to be able to go there with the executives and ring the bell last week in New York. Went public through a SPAC, but Pat Roney, the head of that team, has been rolling up the wine business for years. He's been acquiring, you know, vinter after vinter, vineyard. I mean, it's just been going on and going on. All of these different estates have been acquired under the Vintage Estates label because in the end of the day, if you're going to be a player, you have to have the ability not only to make great wine, but to be able to ship hundreds of thousands of cases a day. And that's what we're able to do now. So I'm very much part of that. I'm exploring a much deeper relationship with the wine industry now as I move into direct-to-consumer in 42 states. That's where you can make money, building a direct relationship with a customer.
That's an exciting opportunity for Mr. Ronay. When I got to visit him in Napa a few weeks ago, and I was humbled by the fact that he would even sit with me uh, days before he went to New York and rang the bell, and I was appreciative of that. And I find that fascinating because he didn't start that long ago, and he's diligent in his discipline, and his business acumen is obviously very good, and his discipline's very high, and he just was studious to make sure he understood the industry and has touched most pieces of it, if not all pieces of it: manufacturing, growing, direct to consumer, the wholesale trade. I buy a lot of wines through the wholesale network here in Southern California from Vintage Estates. And there aren't, I don't know, I think the first public brand of wine was not that long ago, really. How many now do you believe there are? I think there's about 5 or 7 public companies that
Yeah,
deal with wine.
it's not a heavily indexed industry yet. I mean, you think about the difficulty of consolidating and getting scale. The land is very hard to buy. A lot of it's owned by people that don't care if they make money or not. It doesn't matter. It's just a hobby. I mean, there isn't much Sonoma and Napa left to buy anyways, and Walla Walla and Washington State. But at the same time, the industry actually survived quite well through the pandemic as the direct consumer business got launched. And so now some of the skill sets required to make it in the wine business weren't what they were 2 years ago. Direct to consumer marketing, social media, logistics, all of that have now taken the fore. And if you can't provide that in a winery, you're going to go out of business, because we're still not back 100% retail. We're still not back in restaurants open 100% anywhere. We're all optimistic. But the purchase behavior of the average American consumer has changed. They don't want to carry a 39-pound case from the store. They want it delivered to them. And that's what I've learned, and that's what we're focusing on.
Well, the DTC market, direct to consumer market during the pandemic, was incredible, right? So we had an amazing surge here at the Wine of the Month Club. It's still sort of surviving, though we all expect that there'll be some pullback because the restaurants are open, and because the restaurants are buying again, and because consumers want to get out of the house. But it's still quite a spike from 2019 and 2018. But there was something interesting that I had a conversation with the Napa Valley Register wine beat writer, and she was talking about just before the pandemic. I think it was like late February, I visited her. She goes, we're just learning how to chat. And I thought to myself, this is really interesting that most winemakers in the beginning are farmers, right? They farm grapes. They're part of the land. They want to produce a good quality product. They sell the grapes and they start making wine. And I thought, how do you see the farmer in front of a monitor and wait for that chat bell to go off and then try to sell something? And I think what you're saying is exactly right, is moving towards the consumer who understands the internet now, who's always on the internet, who sees these ads on Facebook and Instagram and responds to the ad. Because why? I think pandemic created a lot more confidence in buying wine over the internet.
I also think it's about trusting the brand. I'm very fortunate to have millions of followers on social media. Everybody knows me from Shark Tank as the wine guy. I blend my own wines. I don't just slap my name on a bottle. I really care that these wines are excellent. I serve them to my family. I give them to gifts to all my business partners. So I care what's in the bottle. And I'm pretty good at it. And, I've been able to adapt classic French wines, Pinots and Cabernets and others, Chardonnays, Montrachet, to the American palate. So when I'm thinking about bringing over a Chardonnay from a French heavy oak style, or maybe a crisper Montrachet style, I adapt that into my Chardonnays. And I've been very fortunate because just my standard Chardonnay has now won its 5th gold award. And so I'm very proud of it, because I know that the palate in the U.S. has changed slightly. People don't want the heavy oak anymore. They want a crisper, lighter experience, a lot more fruit forward. And we've been able to develop that into the O'Leary Chards. And as a result, have been winning awards left and right. But I don't think that's rocket science. It's really getting people to try it in different regions of the world. What people say in New York are different what they say in Florida, different what they say in Texas or California. You have to take that data and almost be scientific about it and figure out, okay, these are massive states. I have huge amount of users there that want to try these wines. I've got to blend a wine that's going to match all of their expectations. And that's exactly what we do at O'Leary Fine Wines.
I think that's a hugely important factor of your brand. And I've been watching, celebrity brands come and go for 30 years now. There were 16 PGA golfers that had brands that all failed. There's only one left, of course, Mr. Norman. and it's because you have you take an interest. You actually taste the wines. You actually blend the wines. You actually participate in what the profile of that wine is supposed to be like based on what you're saying, the consumer's interest in the brands. And it's funny you said that about the Over Oak Chardonnays. I did a wedding tasting 2 nights ago at a family's house. I brought an Over Oak Chardonnay, which I don't care for, but people like them, the Rombauers of the world. And I took a nice crisp California Monterey Chardonnay, and that won hands down over the oaked one. And I thought to myself, I said, that's really interesting because it wasn't that long ago that oak Chardonnay would have been the preferred brand and the preferred character, which to us, to you and me in any way, you lose the sense of Chardonnay. The character of the Chardonnay gets lost in too much oak. And you're right about that wine won't age. They're all drunk young, so maybe that's why people like them. They like them because once they did age, they'd be out of balance anyway. It's interesting to me, and I've watched how many episodes of Shark Tanks, and particularly ones that deal with wine. These are pretty well-versed guys and gals on the show. They've been around. They've probably been to many fancy dinners and tastings and things, and they don't seem to really understand wine to the extent that I would think they would. And that's not the right way to say it. That I would say they laughed at you when you were talking about the Chevaliers that one time on that one episode, and I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, either you like wine or you don't, but I think wine can be something you just drink occasionally. It can become a hobby, or it can become a profession. It can become an investment. I have a very, very active futures business. I buy wine futures. I trade what I call divorce sellers. If you have a hedge fund manager getting divorced, the first thing that goes is the seller, and I have a team that goes and assesses what's there, and we bid cash for it. We take an airline hanger and we break it up into the lots for the syndicate. And I've been doing this for years, and I have 5 different sellers around the world. And yet at the same time, wine's a business. And so what I like to do is have a deep knowledge of, the different varietals from the old world, and then try and adapt those to new world palates. And the same thing with Syrahs and Malbecs. I recently launched a Malbec from Argentinian berries, but I had to really pull it back quite a bit because it's such a big, spicy wine that I figured even for people that like spicy Cabernet Sauvignon, I thought it was too overpowering. So I had to do some work in blending it down a bit. And it was well received. We actually partnered with QVC on that one. We sold $5.2 million worth of wine in 20 hours. That's a record.
Wow.
And we were able to ship all that wine within 48 hours. And so that's the combination of the science and the logistics, the investment in infrastructure, and the ability to market the wine, have people trust you. Everybody on QVC knows that I've been selling wine there for years. I'm the number one purveyor of wine there because I built a following that trusts me, and my return rates are extremely low because I know what that buyer wants, and I know what their palate's like and what they enjoy. And so I bring the rosés and the sweet wines in April, and then we pull it back for the fall, Thanksgiving, into the more Pinot, Cabernet Sauvignons, the reds, and then into the holiday season, we go back into the sweet wines with Moscato and things like that. And that whole ebb and flow of taste through the year is part of what we've learned over time to mine data for and figure out what to grow, when to grow it, how much juice to make, how many bottles to prepare for, all of that stuff. It's a science, but it's still an art.
That's a really interesting point. And I talk about this all the time. For one, to make money in this industry is very hard. No matter what side you're on, whether you're a direct-to-consumer center like we are or a manufacturer, it's just difficult to do because the margins aren't that great. You can't buy a widget for $1 and sell it for 10. It doesn't work in the wine business. There's too many hands in the pot. There's too many pieces of money, too many ways to spend money to get it to the consumer, and you've done an incredible job making that efficient and filling the logistics pipeline with wine that allows you to lower shipping costs. And we have returns issues, we have state legislation issues, we have compliance issues, we have COLA labeling. I mean, it's a lot of complicated moving parts to make this work, and you've made it work. I was talking to Mike Salacci at Opus. He was telling me that in 2018, Cabernet Sauvignon was $8,000 a ton for grapes, and that equates to something like $120 a bottle for the juice. Well, how can you possibly compete with other brands that are known well and have to sell the wine for $175 a bottle. I mean, it's almost impossible. And this is what the plight of the pandemic and as well as the fires in Napa have caused a lot of small wineries to be in a rather difficult situation, not having a harvest and not having embraced the direct-to-consumer market like they could have. And the pandemic hit. Now we have all this, there's a lot of commotion going on in Napa right now, but it's a very difficult industry to parse out. And it's kudos to your brand and your branding and the understanding of the marketplace to make it work, because it is more than just the art of wine. I have to say this 1,000 times, but it is business. You can only survive losing money so long when you're trying to make wine and sell it until it's just, you just can't afford it anymore.
It's about scale. When you talk about, juice costing that much a bottle, you can never make money with that situation. The only way around it is to really scale up. You need thousands and thousands of acres. Obviously, Chardonnay and Cabernet Sauvignon are classics. They're the great American red and white wine. But, we also sell Costco and Target and other entities that have huge demands and volume, and they want delivery. The complexity. We even have a specialty business where if you want to etch a magnum for a wedding, we can do that too.
Wow.
We look at all aspects of the direct consumer business and figure out, how do we acquire a customer at what cost, and then what can we sell them on an annual basis, and does it make money? It's very much the ability to understand that preference. But lately, with all of the data you can mine when you sell direct, the preference of flavor, the preference of red versus white, the time of the year they're buying. Is it around a birthday or a holiday? What is it they're actually buying at different seasons? And just pouring all that data together and figuring out what to grow. You have to be totally vertically integrated and make the assumption, you're able to meet demand, because there's nothing worse than acquiring a customer and then dissatisfying them on choices. They can't get what they want when they want it. That's a disaster.
That's a hugely important part in what you're doing, is so right on, because I can't tell you a business I've seen come from business school, entrepreneur school, maybe Harvard Business School, Cornell, and they follow the spreadsheets and that's all they do. And they don't understand that wine is such an emotional product, and you have to connect to the brand. Unlike most products, there are a lot of course, Procter & Gamble toothpaste and salad dressing, but when it comes to wine, it's so brand driven to understand and trust O'Leary Estates as the brand of their choice, and knowing that if you try a new varietal like Malbec or Syrah, that you're going to get a good shot at it being something that you're going to like because you trust the brand, and it's just so important. It's. I'm trying to sort some thoughts on, like, coffee is where. What inspires you to do this in the first place? I mean, we're going to go back to the Chevaliers here in a second, but where was this love of wine? Where did it start?
Well, when I was young, my birth father died when he was 36 years old. He was very young. My mother remarried, and my stepfather actually joined the United Nations, and we started traveling around the world: Tunisia, Ethiopia, Cyprus, Switzerland, Germany, France, Japan. Every 2 years we moved, and it was a remarkable upbringing. But he had a great love of wine, and he, whether we lived in Tunis and Tunisia or Morocco or wherever, he would always learn about the varietals in those regions and look for great wines, and he'd take me on that journey with him, even though I was 15, 16 years old. So I was brought up in more of the traditional European fashion, where kids that age, it's very common to be given wine. It's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I became part of what I knew. And then I became more interested as I got older and got into a much deeper understanding of Bordeaux's and Burgundies and Italian wines, and started to collect and go through the different vintages. I can tell the difference between an 82 and 88, 89 and a 90 now. You could put a mask over the bottle. I'll tell you if it's a vertical Latour or Cheval Blanc, whatever. I did that because I enjoyed it. But the wine business itself actually started from years and years ago. Shark Tank's been on the air for 13 years. And years ago, there was a deal called Zips Wine, which was a single serve application. First time I'd seen it, using nitrogen to seal the plastic glass and making it available, it would last for an entire summer season. And I was intrigued as a business to get involved in that. And I knew at the time, I did the deal. I knew at the time that Costco was the biggest wine buyer on earth. And I just, one of the great things of being a shark is most people return your calls, but I had no idea who the head buyer was. At that time, it was a woman who's now a legend named Annette Alvarez. She worked she started here in Florida, sweeping the floors of Costco, but her palate was so extraordinary that she ended up being the world's largest buyer when she became the head of the entire wine vertical in Costco. And I decided to just cold call her on a Saturday. The air showed on a Friday, and I was able to get her cell phone number through nefarious ways, and I got it. And I left her a message. And about 20 minutes later, the phone rang, and it was Annette. And she said, "You were rude to Barbara last night on Shark Tank." I said, "What? What does that have to do with anything?" And she said, "No, I just didn't like the way you cut her off." And I said, "That's good when I cut her off, Annette. It's good to hear less from Barbara." And anyways, we got into that conversation first. And she basically said, "Look, I know the deal. I watch Shark Tank. I'm leaving with my husband to Hawaii for a holiday. We'll be in John Wayne Airport on next Saturday, a week away. I'll give you an hour of my time in the layover. And I want to meet your wife." And I said, "You want to meet my wife?" She said, "Yeah, I want to know what kind of woman would marry a guy like you." I said, "Okay, great." So we flew across the coast and we met with Annette. And she basically said this to me. It was really intriguing. She said, "Look, Kevin, you want to be in the wine business? You might be a great collector of wine. You may know a lot about wine, but you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to the wine business. I'll tell you what it's going to take to do business with me. If you want to do business with me, you're going to have to take an order from me and deliver me 150,000 cases in 1 week. Now, how the hell are you going to do that?" I said, "Well, Annette, that's ridiculous. I mean, nobody can do that." She said, "Yes, there is someone who can do that. His name is Pat Roney. You go cut a deal with Pat to Vintage Wine Estates. You figure out what you're going to do with him as a partnership, and then we can do business." And that was the beginning of my journey into the real game, because Roney had the scale, he had the logistics, he had the order system, and he had enough juice that I could start blending. In fact, what you're looking at behind me is one of the very first barrel rooms that I was blending in years and years and years ago. This picture is very old. It's when I first started with Roney. And we built this business up together. Initially, I was in retail. But then when the laws changed, and this was the magic moment for me in the wine business, you recall, it was only a few years ago and 42 states opened up that will allow you to directly ship. If you owned a winery in California, direct to the consumer. Well, Katie barred the doors. When I saw that, I said, "Watch this." And we started doing tests on television. It worked. We just blew the doors off direct to consumer. And now, as far as I'm concerned, there's no other way to sell wine. You cut out 3 tiers of distribution. It's spectacular. Direct to consumer.
The laws are changing again, and I think there's more states coming online for the O2 winery licenses in California. There's some states that are headed toward retail as well. There's some states that are clamping down. There's even talk of Utah doing something, which would be like, the only state that's ever thrown anybody in jail for shipping, alcohol into their state. So it's pretty dynamic, and there is this conflict between the Commerce Clause of the Constitution and the restriction of alcohol over state lines, all from post-Prohibition and Joe Kennedy trying to protect his base. But I see that loosening quickly, and you're quick to take advantage of it. But I mean, even then, to produce 150,000 cases in a week was quite a tall order. I mean, that's pretty amazing. How long ago? What year was that you were saying that happened?
That was 8 years ago now. But we do that on a routine basis now. We produce more than that. We ship millions of cases.
Wasn't that I'm sorry. Wasn't that the pre-dosed wines that you were talking about that Shark Tank offer?
It was the single serve, which actually the market never took off for. There's been other attempts to put wine in cans and all kinds of ideas, but the real volume is done in the traditional bottle. I mean, I just shipped my new 2020 Chardonnay this week. This is, I've even pulled back the oak even more. I just keep getting the data, and I mine for the data. And people want those big fruit-forward, crisp Montrachet style apricot, blueberry, raspberry. I mean, it's really this one has been a huge winner for us, and I'm very, very conscious of it. I try it out on lots and lots of women. Women buy about 90% of that chard. And then this is a very rich Pinot Noir. I'm getting better and better with the Walla Valley varietals. The terroir is so close to the DRC region that I'm able to get that barnyard,
Really?
nose that is so famous. And I tell the American palate when I talk to them on television, listen, I want you to smell the inside of a pig barn and I think people really get intrigued because this was one of my best sellers on my recent sale. I said, you're going to smell the barnyard, you're going to smell the pigs, you're going to smell the cows, and then you're going to sip this incredible elixir and you're going to get an explosive outcome. And I got to tell you, the Pinot this year, I was just, even though it's early in the morning for me, I was sampling some of the different bottles to get bottle, just variants to see what it was like across a few cases.
So you're saying it's from Walla Walla?
Yep.
So it's a Washington State Pinot.
Yep. It's spectacular. Oh my goodness.
And
I got to tell you, we can compete with the French. They have the brand, but what we can do now in the new world can kick French butt. There's no question about it.
We're in our infancy. We're in our infancy when it comes to these things. How much potential do we have?
Well, I have Latache in my cellar. I have Echézot, and I'm in the summertime at my lake house. I have the big snobby wine taste soft where I bring out a Latache, a Latour. I go from Burgundy to Bordeaux, and I say, okay, we're going to do a blind taste test. 3 whites, 3 reds, and you're not going to know what they are. And I bring out the heavy guns, like an 82 Latour, and I put my own wine beside it.
That's funny.
And more than 50% of the time, and I have 20, 25 people over. We did a white taste test last year, and it knocked everybody's socks off. I had a $14 bottle of my Chardonnay, and it won. It beat out everything.
That is really funny.
It just shows you need to understand the palate. You need to understand where people's palates are going, where the puck is going, not where it was.
Well, it's interesting you said that you vented this Walla Walla Pinot. For one, Walla Walla for Pinot Noir is a very unusual thing anyway. And so you found a district that creates this Burgundian character, which is fascinating to know. I mean, I've tasted 300 wines a month. I've been doing it for 30 years. I can tell you on one hand probably how many Walla Walla Pinots I've tasted. And here you found
and what happened in this case is we bought a winery and there was barrels of wine, the origin not known, but they were resting in peace there. And so you may be right. They didn't originate there, but we got all the inventory. And when I tasted it, I was blown away.
Wow.
There was also some Cabernet Sauvignon there. So I did something that's extraordinary. I actually blended them across years. I found these incredible barrels. We only had, one crack at the bucket on this one, but we blended a Cabernet Sauvignon from these extraordinary barrels. We're also from Walla Walla, and that won plenty of awards. But it's unusual to do that, to experiment that way. But you can do that in a new world. If you tried to do that in France, you'd lose your pension.
That's right.
I mean, you'd be breaking every law known to man over there. But in the new world, we can experiment. We can try things. We can blend the way we want. And certainly blending is the only way you're going to match the American palate and how fast it moves. But you remember, rosé just a decade ago was nothing. Look at it now.
Incredible.
I mean, it's incredible. And that's partly because of the resurgence of the other thing. I don't know if you remember Brigitte Bardot in one of her early movies in 1954, 55, put ice in her wine. She put ice in her rosé because she was between takes and they filmed it. I think it was Life magazine or Look magazine was on the set shooting, and she was very hot. It was at Cinq on Cinq, which is a famous restaurant. It's just a tent over the sand. And they had all these images of her putting ice into wine, and it caused a sensation. And it's so common today to see people putting ice into their rosé, and that's where it started. And so that experimental vibe, the whole idea of having fun with wines and doing things differently and blending them yourself and saying, go ahead, put ice in the wine. And it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It's what you like. And that's, I guess where I draw the line is I traded a case of Latour 1990 to a buyer who mixed it with Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
That freaked me out.
I read about the Chinese market doing quite a bit of that in the beginning, though I think they're more educated now. but that is kind of disgusting, frankly.
Well, I mean, it's an acquired taste, but that was a 1990 Latour in the wood,
Like
was
one
a
of the
pretty
great
damn
vintages.
rare bottle of wine, and that's what happened to it.
One of the great vintages of the century.
Yeah.
It's funny you said that the rosé thing is very interesting to me because this is Southern California. We don't see a lot. It takes a little longer sometimes for wines to reach the West Coast as far as their palates are concerned. But now I'm seeing so many rosés from many, many districts of the world, and I'm trying to determine whether these rosés are new or they've always had them at these obscure districts. They just decided to start sending them. Like you can buy Tuscan rosés and Bordeaux rosés, which are kind of rare. Rosés from the Canary Islands, from Sardinia, from Croatia, and so I'm thinking, gee, did the rosé phenomenon start, and so these districts decided to make them, or they've always made them and now they're popular?
No, they haven't always made them. What happened was this explosion of North American demand for rosés, and also, the different styles of rosés, because I notice on the East Coast, when we bring a sweeter rosé, we do very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
And so same with Moscato. I mean, those wines do incredibly well in the April time period. And then as we get into the fall, we want something a little crisper. And the season for rosés extended a little bit. You still get sales in September, which was unheard of. And so it's becoming a varietal of year-round popularity. And a rosé is not a wine you're going to cellar for more than, I don't know, 15 months or something.
Right.
I try and make sure I'm out of it by the end of the season. So I'm not leaving it lying down over the winter. But the demand is insatiable. So all these regions you just spoke of said, wait a minute, I know how to make a rosé. I'll figure that out because I can sell every case I make. And all rosés, as you know, are not made equally. And there's a lot of really crappy rosé on the wine, on the market. And when I really, when you bring a rosé, you want to make sure, because you're going to get a lot of cross-pollination from your Moscato drinker, from people that really like sweet wines, dessert wines. They're going to try that rosé, and you want to make sure that their expectations are met. I'm all about it. I always say, I have your back on wine. You're going to try something new for me. You know my brand. Trust me, I'm going to make it for you. And so far, knock on a wood barrel, I've been successful.
That's interesting because I took these 3 rosés for this wedding, and I deliberately took 3 different styles because I wanted them to taste. And I had the whole table. There was 8 people there. Everybody had a different opinion about which one they thought was best. And there was one sweeter, slight residual sugar pump up. It was from Paso. I had one from the Provence, which is leaner and cleaner. And I had one biodynamic wine. I think it was from Mendocino, actually. And all 3 of them had a separate character, and each one of them garnered the votes from various people, but none of them came out as shiners. And I thought, wow, different palates just sitting at this table when it comes to rosé. And what I think happened with this group, who were not rosé drinkers prior, they realized this is a pretty fascinating product, and they are so different from place to place and from manufacturer to manufacturer. And you're right, there's some really, really bad ones. I taste them all the time. I find this really I find this fascinating because you were talking about the New World, and it's very important. Jacques Lardier from Louis Jadot has told me, look, you guys in the New World from the beginning have a chance to do whatever you want and to taste and experiment, including with food. In Burgundy, we're forced to make Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, basically. Bordeaux, we have 5 red grapes and 3 white grapes. We're stuck with that, and the foods have grown that way as well. They sort of come along. But in the New World, and I've been reading books on the cuisine of America, we get to experiment. We get to grow Malbec in Napa if we want to, or we can grow it in Paso. We can grow it in Walla Walla, Washington. Doesn't matter. We can try it and see how it works. But you belong to this organization, which is quite historical, called the Confrérie Chevalier de Testament. And that is dyed-in-the-wool traditional Burgundy. How did this come about?
I have a very extensive cellar of Burgundian DRCs, which I did as an investment years and years ago. These wines now trade for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a bottle, as you're aware. I don't sell my DRCs; they're very hard to get. The prices have gone insane. It's very difficult to stay with your allocation each year as you watch these price escalations of 20 to 40% some years. But if you look for the most extreme wine lovers on earth, you're going to find them in Burgundies, in white Burgundy and in red Burgundies. you're so the way to appreciate it is to go there and see how small this region is. I mean, the Montrachet, vineyard is the size of your backyard. Each row is worth 2 million, 3 million euro. LVMH is trying to buy them one row at a time. Is the way the king used to get on death taxes half a row of wine there. I mean, it's extraordinary. And the wines have brand, they have history, they have all of that. And so those societies, the Chevalier de Testament, they gather usually every 60 days, and we do some serious drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Our cellar in our chapter is worth millions of dollars. And if you want to come in as a member now, you've got to buy in. But the deal we have for members, if you can make the cut, is you buy in at our cost. So you're getting an automatic appreciation of almost 500% to your allocation of the cellar. So we have lots of people who like to join, but we're very, very selective. As per the rules, you really have to know your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have an allegiance, at least a collection, at least a commitment to the Burgundian wines, which, everybody drinks Bordeaux. I get it. But when you don't bring a Bordeaux to a Chevalier de Testament dinner, I remember somebody did that once. that doesn't happen. And so you're basically having these roaring debates. And as you remember, in the mid-90s, there was a corkage issue on the whites. And so no one ever solved it, but a lot of the white had matterized, spoiled, oxidized. It was tainted. You can't ship it back. And we had these raging debates as to what happened. And yet the other night here in Miami, I enjoyed a 1996 Montrachet that was perfect.
Wow.
With one of my neighbors a few towns north of here, who's got one of the world's largest private collections of white Burgundies here in Florida. I have never seen a cellar that large. And because he has such perfect provenance for getting these wines, he's aging whites in a rare way that you don't see anymore.
For the listener, I wanted to peel back a little bit, because in Burgundy, you're required to grow in the reds Pinot Noir, unless you're in the south, you can grow some Gamay Beaujolais. But in Bordeaux, you're allowed to grow up to 5 varietals and blend them any way you want, or bottle them 100%. And so the argument goes on between the two districts is Bordeaux winemakers are blenders. They're farmers too, but they're blenders. And in Burgundy, we have to be very conscientious about our terroir and make sure that we garner the best grape from that soil. And there's something fascinating about Burgundy that turns me on, frankly. And I learned it from Albert Bichot, the group Albert Bichot, when they brought the rock samples from 10 meters down where the tap roots are. And if you're across the street from one of the great districts, let's just say Montrachet, that 30 meter or that 30 foot or 10 meter root is touching completely different soil than its neighbor. And hence these small vineyards that create such dramatically different wines from its neighbor across the street, virtually from across the street. And that part is extraordinarily fascinating because it is terroir driven. Is it not just completely driven on what we're going to get out of the soil?
Yeah. I mean, people don't, in the New World, don't put as much weight on what I call stressing the grape. I mean, obviously, the rules in Burgundy. You can't water it. You can't put manure on it. Farmers that have caught putting manure in their pants and then walking their vines and then letting it fall in their pant legs, moving their palms. No. I mean, all these rules are very strict and handed down from hundreds of years ago. But it does show up in the personality of the wine. And I can tell, it's incredible. I'm really in Bordeaux. I love Latour and I love Cheval Blanc, and I've loved those forever. And I have massive verticals of those wines, but they have a different personality. They're not far apart from each other, but they're completely different. It's a combination of the blending and the terroir and the style of the cellar, but that tobacco-y, cigar-y vibe that a Latour has is never present in a Cheval Blanc, ever. It's a very delicate wine. And I love to, if people often come over for dinner to our home and I'll say, look, how into wine are you? Because if they tell me they don't care, I'm not going to open a Latour.
No, right. Exactly.
But if they really are knowledgeable, I'll say, let's go deep vertical. Let's try two different wines and two different time frames and enjoy the conversation about it. Wine is about storytelling. The making of it certainly about storytelling, but the drinking of it brings people together. I think it's a wonderful business if you can get into a place where you're making money doing it. And it takes you into extraordinary situations. Let me give you an example. I'm also a very large watch collector. It's a huge hobby of mine. It's an investment I make. I have very, very unique pieces. Now, here's where the two worlds merge together. There is a watchmaker named F.P. Journe. He's a Frenchman, but he has set up shop in Geneva about 20 years ago. And he became an extraordinary watchmaker. He only makes 900 pieces a year. They appreciate in value about 400% the minute they leave the shop, if you can get one, which is nearly impossible. However, here's what happened. Again, a great story. He shows up in Geneva making extraordinary timepieces as a young, master and learning his trade as a watchmaker. Some of the authorities in Geneva say that, look, if you move to Geneva, we'll let you put the seal de Genève on the back of the watch, saying that it's a Swiss-made watch headquartered in Geneva. And he said to them, no, I'm not putting that brand on my pieces. Mine are too good for that.
Wow.
I'm above that. And the watch community, imagine Patek Philippe, Rolex, Audemars Piguet, all these massive brands, they just freaked out. Who the hell is this guy?
Wow.
How could he even think that? And that was the beginning of the legend of F.P. Journe. He's still alive. He's the Picasso of watchmaking.
Wow.
However, this October, when the Journe Society meets, they'll be meeting in this exact room you see behind me. We're going to have a special tasting of my varietals from that year, right out of the barrel. And we'll be also together with some of the most serious watch collectors in the world, combining those two worlds together. People that collect really high-end, you wouldn't be surprised to know that also collect really high-end wines, and it's a wonderful chance. And F.P. Journe is an huge advocate for French wines, and I plan on doing a blind taste test against his wines. He makes some, and I'm going to kick his ass.
That's great. I'd like to be a fly on the wall on that one.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we were talking about this before, and I brought it up. I mean, I put in my notes about watch collecting. I'm a classic car guy. I love classic cars. Watch the auctions. I'm constantly sending friends links to cars coming up for sale, and it's a volatile market, right? It always seems to go up. The upward graph has always been upwards, but it takes major dips along the way based on recessions and economic booms. Is it the same with watches and particularly with wine as well? It's so hard to resell a wine, but you have a seller that would be properly controlled. But do you find that with the watches as well?
The trouble with the watch market, when you get into the rarefied pieces, I have one of a kind pieces now that are made by the various maisons for me because I'm known as a collector. I can't sell those sideways. It would be impossible to have Audemars Piguet make a one of a kind watch and then all of a sudden see it show up in the secondary market during your lifetime. Mm-hmm. So they would expect to see it in the estate sale after your passing. That makes sense, or passed on to your son or whatever in your family. But so yes, while they're investments, and I do mark to market them for insurance purposes each night electronically. There's all kinds of applications now. One is called Chrono 24 that looks at the trading prices of every watch around the world every minute, so that you're able to assess the value of your collection. But I don't sell watches because, this is an F.P. Journe on my wrist right now, Centigraph. This watch is one of 10 made. Wow. Only 10. There was a demand of 1,000 people wanted to buy it. I was very, very fortunate to be one of the 10 picked to own it. It's 6 of 10. I've been offered ridiculous amounts of money for it, but if FP knew that I sold that watch without his knowledge, I'd be cut off. I would no longer be invited back to buy more pieces. And
that's a very personal thing.
It's a very personal thing. It's a very, very interesting relationship between the maker and his collectors. Mm-hmm. And yet the value inherent on this piece, I mean, some of these are selling for $1 million at auction.
Wow.
So,
And you're wearing it around. That's great.
man, I believe a watch loses its soul if it's not worn.
Sure.
I mean, I know collectors that keep them in their boxes. I have all the original papers and everything, but I wear up to 3 different watches a day. And,
That's
one for the
interesting.
morning, one at noon, one at night. The only challenge I've got now is my wife, when I come home with another watch, she says, why did you buy another watch?
Well, I think
You can't even wear the ones you've got anymore. This is just insane. And I said, you just don't understand the passion of this. She says, no, I don't. You've got to stop doing this. It's not a passion. You have a disease.
we have the same problem at different levels because I get the same pushback when
she says, you're sick. You're a sick person and you need help. You have to stop doing this.
I got pushback on the podcast.
That's it.
You brought something up earlier, which was very interesting because it is about the story and I think doing this podcast in the media, as you understand it, you've been in the business forever, and you even had TV stations. I love it. I love doing it, and I don't care if I'm making money at doing this podcast or not. I want to do it, and I want to meet people like you, and I want to talk to other winemakers across the world and find out what they're thinking and what they're doing. And one guy put it the other day. He says, I've met the most incredible people, tasted the most incredible wines, and had the best food. I would never trade this lifestyle for anything. And the story behind all that is just becoming part of it. And I think I was telling you about this tasting I had for this wedding. And I was sitting there talking to my friends, a couple of couples there I didn't know. And one of them says, I heard your podcast on Veuve Clicquot. I go, great. He goes, so I went out and bought a bottle of Gold Label, and I tried to get my wife to drink it. And she says, why are you drinking champagne? It's in the middle of the day, or it's like at nighttime. It's not a celebration. But you taught me through your story of Tilar Mazzio's book right here that this is a very important piece of business. She was an incredible businesswoman, Barb Nicole. She was an incredible packager. She was an incredible logistics person. She was an incredible winemaker. She's an incredible socialite. And that was a really cool story. And that story is from 1790 or something. But it created it created a desire in this person to go out and buy the wine, and go out and buy the watch, to go out and buy the car, to go out and buy, like I have a dune buggy, a 1969 dune buggy Myers makes. I only bought it because when I was a kid, my uncle took me out in his. And I thought one day I'm going to own this car. And I finally got to afford it, which, it's not an expensive car, but it's about the story. It's about what we're doing. It's about the history of it. And in your case with the watches, you can't sell it because you're the owner. The story's going to be, this was Kevin O'Leary's watch. And he was the only person that got to buy, one of 10. And that's an important
there was
story.
an auction Phillips had early in the year for a good cause. And I'm known for wearing a steel white-faced Daytona with a red band on Shark Tank. I've had for years. And that particular watch, the Prince of Monaco asked me to put into the auction, and it did very, very well. But I have to admit, I didn't think about how I'd feel when I FedExed it to them.
Wow.
But I'd worn that watch for years. And so even though Rolex was going to give me a new one, it's not the same. It's not that watch.
Right.
And so that went for a very high price. I'm very proud of it. I'm happy to support the charity, but I'm never doing that again.
Wow.
I'm not giving up a watch that I've worn for years because I really felt a part of my soul was lost there.
And your wife will say it's a disease, see?
That's right. It was really crazy.
We're coming on 50 minutes, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I wanted to tell you about two things. And I was talking to Mr. Spurrier, the great late Stephen Spurrier, and I was telling him about the Les Amis de Vin. It used to be a chapter here in Southern California. My father started, and it was a worldwide group, not like the Chevaliers, but it was an important group for wine aficionados. It was an important group for the consumer to learn about wine, to not be duped into Groupon only type wines, to hear the stories, to hear the lectures, to have dinners. And I've garnered the trademark for Les Amis de Vin, and I'm going to resurrect the 501c3 to re-educate the American palates, the American consumers on what the wine business is about. And at the behest of Mr. Spurrier before he passed away, he says, you must do this. And so I'm going to start that up. I want to send you some communication on it. I've sort of brainstormed the idea. What does this thing look like in a virtual world? Is it virtual tastings? Is it live tastings? Is it dinners? What's going to be involved? But I want to bounce it off of you since you're tightly connected to the passion of the wine business. And that's what I want this Les Amis event group to do. So I'm going to expect that in the email. But the other thing we're doing,
it's a great idea. My thing would be start small in a small geographic region and build it up. I mean, people want to, our group, the Chevalier du Testament, does a WhatsApp conversation every night about what everybody drinks. Yeah, every night. We're always sampling each other's wines. Everybody starts with a white and goes into red for dinner. We're all in the database of knowledge of the different varietals that are being tried across that group of 80 people every night. I mean, you learn a lot.
That's amazing.
If you find a wine from a certain year that looks bad, everybody go checks their cellars to see how many they've got and see if there's any. It's a very interesting form of communication.
It's a great idea.
It is. It works. I mean, that came out of the pandemic. It's not going to stop. We're still doing it every night because people really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and it's you can do it from anywhere in the world. So the other thing
I really enjoyed this. This was quite different than what I thought it would be. It's great.
Thank you.
It's terrific.
The last thing I'm going to tell you about is a very special meeting. My good friend Mark Williamson at Willie's Wine Bar in the Premier Arrondissement in Paris. It's a brasserie. If you haven't heard about it, he's been there since the 80s. He used to work for Steven Spurrier. We're putting together sort of a soiree, maybe the first quarter next year, or the second quarter. Chefs, winemakers, professionals in the industry to celebrate Steven Spurrier's life, just to get together, drink, and we're calling it Magnums at Willie's. Some of the great negociants will be there, and winemakers of the world, and chefs. And I'm inviting you now. I'll keep you posted. If you happen to be in Paris,
that sounds wonderful.
It's gonna be a great party.
If I may just do a shameless plug for something that's going to be lighting up soon. I'm doing a massive new online platform called Shop Mr. Wonderful, where I'm going to be offering my wines in addition to some other Shark Tank gourmet products.
Great.
And look for it soon. I think it'll be amazing pricing, but I just want to continue to expand this relationship I have with hundreds of thousands of people who bought my wines direct from the vineyard. So I want to grow that business even bigger.
Well, you're a trusted source of passion for food and wine, and I think you'll do well with that. So before we get off, tell me, you don't sound like the guy on the Shark Tanks, the Mr. Wonderful, which is sort of a not condescending, but it's sort of an ironic term for the way you treat sometimes people. And I know that part of that's, you don't sound like that person. So where did Mr. Wonderful come from that they call you this?
Well, we think it's Barbara. In the first season when we were doing the, we obviously started, she said, aren't you just Mr. Wonderful? I've done some aggressive deal. And I said, yeah, I am Mr. Wonderful. And it just stuck. And, Barbara and I are great friends. We've been doing this for 13 years together. The only reason she gets to the Shark Tank set on time every year is I buy her a new broom.
Well, that must be a collection by now then. It's great.
Yeah, definitely. She's got the latest model every year. She flies across the sky.
That's really funny. We'll close on that. Thank you so much for the time today, and I hope we get to do it again one time, but I will keep you posted on both Les Amis de Vin and as well as the event at Willie's Wine Bar.
Thank you very much. Take care, my friend.
Cheers. Thank you. Take care. Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalemkiarian. Don't forget to subscribe because there's more great interviews on their way. And of course, all these podcasts are sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, 48 years in business. Don't forget to visit our website, wineofthemonthclub.com. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.